It's a little after 9. We're going to give folks just a couple minutes to trickle in with coffee. Okay, I'm kind of thinking we can start, even though it says time cushion for attendees to trickle in. I feel like we're there. Good morning. Welcome to day 2 of the Housing Oregon Conference. Thank you for spending your morning, or at least the first 15 minutes until you figure out if this is what you meant to be in with us. This is Housing Development 101. So navigating affordable housing development in Oregon. We'll talk briefly at the beginning about what we think that is and what we're going to talk about, so you can decide if that's, again, what you wanted to do this morning. So everybody up here on the stage is with the Housing Development Center.
Seat right up here,
yeah. My name is Tracy Manning, and I am privileged to be the executive director. Next slide. The clicker does not make it all the way back to the room, so we are on verbal clicker. So navigating affordable housing. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to talk about the foundations of affordable housing development. So processes, roles, risks, rewards, aka should you even consider doing this? So that's what we're going to talk about this first session. Next session, we'll talk about the time period between, we're going to pretend you decided we should do this, and we've done some feasibility work. Then we're going to talk about funding to closing on your construction loan, keeping your North Star while you're navigating a whole bunch of decisions and challenges. And then finally, we're going to talk about the construction period and the ownership and operation period, which is in theory why you did this in the first place. And so that'll be the third session. That's the session that's after lunch. Next slide. Okay, introductory session. What we're going to talk about is fundamental issues to consider during the initial feasibility phase. So that's when you're deciding if the project that you're conceiving is going to work out. What should you be thinking about? We're going to talk about the roles and risks of development and what's a strategy to be successful. So you're going to prepare yourself, your project, your organization for success. When we, as development consultants, get a phone call from somebody who says, hey, we're thinking about developing and wondering if we can talk to you about it, the first thing we encourage them to think about, them being the organization that wants to develop, their board, their executive team, their accounting staff or consultant, is why do you want to do this? And so that's where we're really going to start, because what we are guessing is that you have an objective that's related to the reason that you called us. And so teasing that out to see if this is a good idea for you. Okay, next slide. Icebreaker. Okay, we're not going to do any weird, like, what would you be if you were a fruit thing. Okay, watch out for this one. She might do it. Okay, so we're just going to try to figure out who's in the room. So raise your hand if you are currently a developer or development consultant. Okay, small number. And Andrea would like you to know there's 2 chairs up front here if you are interested in a chair for this session. Raise your hand if you're sitting next to an empty chair. Awesome. It is also, it's warm in here. Yeah. I don't know. Can you prop those doors open? Okay. So raise your hand, and you can raise your hand more than once if more than one of these labels applies to you. Raise your hand if you are a resident or supportive service provider. Good, 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 good. Very important to this process. Not considered early enough. Raise your hand if you are here as a board member. Excellent, excellent, good. Very important that you are here. Executive director or other senior organizational leader, you define. Good, 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 good. Asset or property manager. Oh, excellent. So even. Something else.
Gotta pull it out.
Okay, somebody say, what are you? Data analyst. Good. Oh, good. Okay, everybody just listen to this person. Okay, what are you? Oh, excellent. Okay, one more. IT. Good. Good, good, good. Okay, great. Okay, and then the other thing, raise your hand if either you or the organization you think you're here representing have been through a housing development cycle, like beginning to end. Okay, so a fair number of people. Good. That's good. Please help your neighbor. Okay, next slide. So this is basically, once again, what we're going to be talking about today. So today we're talking about an overview of the affordable housing and feasibility phase for new construction development. So lots of you have been through a development process, and you might sort of sit there and say like, oh, well, that doesn't count because it's a rehab, or it was different for us because we had this partner. You're right. We decided to keep it simple, keep to one topic. So we're going to talk about some of our collective firsthand experiences, some of yours, some for the people who are on Zoom, and just the fundamentals of typical new development projects. So, that means that we're not going to talk about transitional housing. We're not going to speak to preservation, really, really, really important topics that we just aren't going to specifically speak to. We're not going to do a real technical deep dive, although we love talking about that stuff. So come ask us afterward. And we're not going to talk a ton about partnerships, but again, we have seen lots of them and have been in lots of them. So if you want to talk to us about it afterward, we love to talk about dorky technical stuff. Next slide. Okay, so this is our credibility slide. Why were we asked to do this presentation? Housing Development Center is a nonprofit consulting group. We've been around for 30 years. We've got 21 staff, 15 of whom do development, 3 of whom do asset management. We're also a lender. We have a small CDFI that is targeted to helping folks develop affordable housing. Our mission, centering those who have been historically oppressed, HDC collaborates with its partners to envision, develop, and sustain affordable homes and community places. We work just with nonprofits and housing authorities in Oregon and Washington. That's also where we do our lending. We're consultants. Our clients are the experts in the communities that they serve. Our job is to lift up their vision, what they're trying to achieve for their community. And so we have expertise that hopefully will help them do that. And next slide. I'm going to let all these lovely people introduce themselves as they start speaking. Just real quickly, our basic services, what we're best known for is development services. So starting from project planning all the way through to the very end of the project, leasing it up, signing off, getting your permanent financing in place. We have assisted in the development of over 8,000 units. We also do facilities work. So healthcare facility associated with your affordable housing project is a common example. We've done about 300,000 square feet of facilities assisting nonprofits, housing authorities in Oregon. Next slide. Asset management. We do a lot in asset management, and you'll hear if that's what you're particularly interested in, which I would encourage. People forget that you're going to own this darn thing for 60, 99 years. A lot about that in the third session. Development gets a lot of attention, but owning the housing is why you're doing it, presumably to meet your mission. And owning the housing, it can be hard and expensive. And there's really great ways to do it to make sure that the cute little housing project that you're envisioning in day one is going to meet your mission. So we assist organizations throughout the state in a whole variety of ways to make their existing housing sustainable for the long term. Next slide. So we have a small called a community development financial institution. We do primarily pre-development lending, but we've also done acquisition and bridge lending to help people realize their projects financially. If you're interested in that, check out with me afterward. Next slide. And then finally, we do policy and industry support. Like I said, we've been around for 30 years. So we do stuff like this. Our asset management staff convenes a statewide network of property and asset managers. They learn together, share information, and importantly, help move change in the state. As developers, at any given time, we've got usually over 25 projects we're working on in-house. And so that gives us both a broad and a deep view of what's happening in our industry at any given time. And so, on our good days, we use that information to help make your missions come to life in a better way, faster, easier, and in the ways that you want it to. So that is who we are and why we have the credibility to at least attempt to give this presentation. And you can tell us at the end how we did. So I am going to turn it over to Travis. And next slide.
Yeah, good morning. Welcome, everybody. And one of the things, we did a great job of putting in copious notes to share information with you. One of the things we failed to put in the notes was if you have questions, raise your hand, speak out, jump in. Totally happy to answer questions as we go along. Feel free to filter into here. There's some room on the other side of the room if you want to jump in. But ask us questions as we go along. If we're going to get to it a little bit later in the presentation, or it's maybe just a little bit outside of the focus of what we're presenting, we'll put it in a parking lot for you and make some notes so that we can come back to it or follow up with you after the session. But please flag us down as we go with any questions. But to start out with, maybe just to kind of get everybody in the room on the same page, when we're talking about affordable housing, what do we mean when we say that? Folks who've been around me for a while know that I'll often say, if this were easy work, everyone would be doing it. I've got a few gray hairs because of it, but it's also really rewarding. And also didn't put that in my notes. I'm Travis Phillips, along with my colleague Julie here. We are the directors of real estate development at Housing Development Center. We're the ones that work with and lead the teams that support our clients to really realize the visions that they have in terms of housing and community development projects. So talking about affordable housing, just really briefly, to describe a little bit of the housing continuum. We're not going to talk about all of this in depth today, but the housing continuum includes everything from homeless shelters and transitional housing for folks who are experiencing homelessness, permanent supportive housing, affordable rental housing for low-income folks, workforce housing for low but less low-income folks, and it also includes home ownership options. We're just going to focus in on a little bit of that today. For the purposes of today, we're going to talk about affordable rental housing that includes some public development subsidy. So that's often from our public agencies. That might be the City of Portland's Housing Bureau, that might be Metro, that might be the state of Oregon, or that might be federal resources. But generally then those come, it's no such thing as a free lunch, and those come with some sort of restrictions that accompany the support that makes that affordable housing viable or doable. Those are during the development process. Those restrictions are throughout the life of the property, have all sorts of different terms and details to them, and we'll get into a little bit more of that later. And that's why we're here, to better understand those requirements. A couple other notes. So permanent supportive housing, when we talk about that, that's deeply affordable housing, most often for folks who've experienced chronic homelessness. And or as well as other disabling conditions, paired with robust supportive services to ensure that they can become and sustain stability in their housing. We won't dive deeply into PSH today. I know there are other sessions during this conference that really get into that. I encourage you to join those, including tomorrow at 10:30 with Liz Winchester from our asset management department, who will dig into funding, developing, and asset managing PSH properties with a number of other partners. And while we won't go deep into PSH today, the information that we'll share in these sessions does have some special applications to permanent supportive housing. When I say PSH, I mean permanent supportive housing. The increased need for development, rent, and operating funding, since residents who've experienced homelessness often have limited ability in terms of what they can pay for rent, as well as the increased need to pay attention to development decisions to be responsive to their needs and make sure a property works in the long term. And I'll talk a little bit more about levels of affordability in just a minute, but we'll just call attention to two ways that affordability might be achieved in affordable housing development. One is to lower the rent. That's bringing development subsidy to the project in order to reduce the amount of cost that the owner must bear or the developer must bear in order to make it happen. And the second way is to secure rent subsidy. Rent subsidy would ensure that a resident pays no more than 30% of their income in rent, regardless of what they earn. State and federal or other subsidy covers the remainder of that up to an agreed upon amount. But there's not enough of that to go around. The Center for Budget and Policy Priorities cites that only 1 in 4 households eligible for rental assistance, that there's enough to cover that. And so now we're going to drill down a little bit more on what we mean by affordable and some of examples of who might be in that housing. Next slide. So this is just some quick math about how affordability is typically calculated when we talk about that. Rent for a 2-bedroom unit would assume a 3-person household. Area median income is typically, or you might hear it referred to as median family income, AMI or MFI. In the Portland metro area, that's established by HUD for every area across the country on an annual basis. $102,960 is considered median income for a 3-person household in the Portland metro area in 2023. For reference, just to give you ideas of a couple other parts of the state, Douglas County was $76,000 and Marion County was $83,700. So that varies based upon the area of the state or country or whatnot. Get a little bit into the weeds. Rents are based on unit size and assume 1.5 persons per bedroom, except for studios, which are 1. As you might expect, median income is skewed by high earners and has been growing really quickly in recent years, even though lower income households' incomes have been much more stagnant. Not surprisingly, that creates a problem. That's not necessarily a problem we're going to solve in this session today. But I think it's important to be aware of it. And then the final thing that I'll note here is that a 3-person household, as defined by the rules that HUD sets for this, could be 3 adults, all who may have incomes. It also could be a single parent with 2 young children who obviously aren't going to be out earning income. And so that creates some additional hurdles. Again, not ones that we're going to solve today, but something to be aware of as you're thinking about rents and incomes. How they get calculated, you take the median income. Affordable housing is typically restricted at 60% of area median income or less. And it's considered affordable when a household pays no more than 30% of their income on housing and housing related expenses. So 60% of that 102,000 number is just over 60,000. Divide that by 12 months, you've got $5,000 a month in income, and 30% of that says that about $1,500 is affordable to somebody who earns that income. And then I just made the note there that those are based on unit size, not household size, despite the fact that a household must qualify based on the income level. And median income doesn't obviously include actual incomes. And next slide. So just a few examples here, and apologize for jumping around between locations and timing. There's a lot of information in here, and keeping it continuously updated takes a lot, but I think this will give you a good idea. Folks at 0 to 30% of area median income, these are based on Clackamas County numbers for 2020. That might be a senior on a fixed Social Security income. Somebody between 30 and 60% AMI, might include a personal care aide, a preschool teacher, or an admin assistant in an office. And between 60 and 80% AMI, that's typically above what rental housing is restricted at, but often does qualify when you're looking at workforce or home ownership. That's your mail carrier, that's a paramedic, and perhaps somebody who's supervising a manufacturing line. So just to give you a little bit of idea of who we're talking about, who might qualify for these levels of housing. Next slide. So when we're thinking about developing affordable housing, the sort of, so you want to do this, you know, why even do this? And the answer is probably that you're crazy, but you're crazy and want to do something good in the community and support the people that you serve. So just a few examples of why organizations might want to move forward and develop affordable housing includes serving communities that are not well served by others. So that might be individuals with severe and persistent mental illness. That might be communities of color that are not well served in your community. That might be farm workers. That might be folks experiencing homelessness. There are as many reasons as there are distinct demographics and groups who are not well served. And being able to do a better job of that than what exists in the market is what motivates a lot of the folks that we work with. As well, you may be a service provider, you may be adjacent to housing development and ownership, and you see, wow, the folks who own housing, the folks who manage housing just really aren't doing a good job of meeting our residents' needs. The folks that we're supporting, they're not doing a good job of meeting the residents' needs. The housing isn't right for them. They're not getting the support they need. There's not coordination between management and services, and the idea that that you'd want to jump in and develop your own housing so that you have more control over that is really a, you know, it's a reason for sure, one that's a little bit complicated, but a very viable and valid reason. And then certainly developer fees. These are the fees that are intended to really support the work that we all do as developers and owners of affordable housing, to compensate you for the staff time, for the risk, for the projects that didn't move forward for whatever reason. Those developer fees are obviously really important and help to sustain the organization, fund the services that organizations provide that they don't get paid for otherwise. And that obviously is a really important reason why folks do it too. And then finally, I'll just make note here that there are some pros and cons of different approaches. As Tracy mentioned, there are all sorts of partnerships and other connections that folks might make when they're not ready to develop themselves for whatever reason, or don't want to for whatever reason. Joint developments and joint ownership are one opportunity. Partnerships are another. So that may look different than a joint ownership. You've got an owner and a service provider, or perhaps somebody has the land and you want to develop on it, and you create some sort of either financial or other partnership with them. You might want to go it alone, so you have all the control and you get all the reward, but you also get all the risk. And all of those, not only the risk, but the reward, the money, the control, that opportunity might present different reasons for doing a joint development, a partnership, or might be your motivation for just going it alone. And with that, I'm going to hand that off to Andrea.
Thanks, Travis. So first, I just want to welcome our friends in the hallway. Hello. I'm wondering if these folks here, this is the mom and me, sorry. Maybe you guys could move a little bit over there, and some of these people from the hallway could come in. If you guys don't mind moving your chairs. Thank you. And folks in the hallway, this makes a little space for you, unless you prefer out there, that's fine too. So my name is Andrea Sanchez, and I'm the Deputy Director at HDC, and I've been at HDC since 2017. I've been doing real estate development, predominantly affordable housing, for nearly 25 years now. I love working at HDC, and I love working with our clients, and really honored to talk today about the roles during the development process. And before I go into that, I want to start by introducing the phases of development. And these phases are what we will commonly reference through the balance of today's session. So first is feasibility, and this is really when you identify your site. You ensure that your project is both physically feasible and financially feasible, and you begin to seek your major funding award. Pre-development. This is when you finish your design, you get your permits, you select your lenders and your tax credit investor, and you close on funding. And then the fun begins. You get to build the project. And then finally close out. And this is when you're leasing up your units and you pay off your construction loan and your permanent financing comes in. So again, these are the phases of development that we will be referencing throughout the balance of today. Next slide, please. So when we did the hand raise, I definitely noticed that there were both board members in the room as well as management. And so I'm going to go into a little bit about what is the role of board and management in the development process. So the board and management set the project vision. The organization should know where you want to develop and who it wants to serve. Most importantly, the board and management have a fiduciary role. They're all important, but this one I feel like, as it relates to risk, is really important. So is your balance sheet ready? So most investors and lenders will require that the organization has $1 million in liquidity and $5 million in net assets in order to meet the guarantor requirements. So another question you might ask yourself is, do you have sufficient pre-development dollars available? Travis mentioned money that is spent that never comes back to the organization because the project never went through. And those are the pre-development dollars that are at risk. And so do you have the ability to risk those funds? And if not, or you have some money, but not all the money, does the board and management have the wherewithal to borrow these funds, and with what collateral? The board and management have a strategic role. There needs to be a staffing plan in place. So do you plan on using existing staff and reallocating their job needs? Are you going to be hiring new staff? Or are you going to be hiring a development consultant? Or is it some combination of all of those? What are the relationships that you have in place to gain political support for the project? Or what are the relationships that you need to develop to have the political support? And then in what ways will you select your development team? And I'm going to define development team in the next slide, but I mean, do you have a procurement policy? Are there particular criteria that you want your staff to use to select your general contractor and your architect, for example? Do you have equity goals, or are there green building goals? So these are examples of the ways in which the board and management play a role in the development process. Next slide. So before we go into the role of the developer, I want to just touch on the development team members and want to emphasize that the developer is not out there alone doing this, putting the project together. And in fact, it is quite the opposite. It's a collaborative endeavor, and it requires many, many skill sets. And this is the group that supports the directive from the board and management. They support and implement the vision. The other thing about this group is that you work together for a very, very long time. I would say on average, 3 to 5 years. Before the session started, we were just talking up here and we were talking about a project that just got a temporary certificate of occupancy yesterday. And the land was donated for this project in 2012. So that gives, I mean, that's an extreme, but it's an example, a real life example of how long it can take. So you'll see on the slide, I've listed the team members, the core development team members, the people that you're really getting into this long-term relationship with are it's the developer, your architect, your general contractor, your development consultant, whatever the staffing is that you've chosen to be able to implement this project, and your funders and your lenders. So next slide. Okay, so now you've got a vision in place. You've made some strategic decisions. You've got a sufficient balance sheet. You have your development staff in place. Now you can really begin the work to bring this project into reality. I think the role of the developer is best understood by development phase. So the rest of today's session and the rest of the team at HDC is going to be going into each one of these phases in detail. So for right now, I'm just talking about them at a high level. So the role of the developer in feasibility and pre-development, this is really when you assemble your core team and you work to refine the board's vision. You create a concept project and you ensure that it fits physically on your site and that you have an achievable financing strategy. So for example, that you're thinking about, I'm going to be applying to OHCS for funds, and how does my project align with the policy goals at the state level? So you're making sure that your concept, your vision aligns also with the funders who you're going to be seeking funds from, excuse me. And then the other thing tied to those policy goals that in particular our major funders have is that it's time to start making application to those funders. once you have all your financing secured, you can start construction. And this is really the ongoing day-to-day work with the general contractor and the architect. This is when you're monitoring your project against schedule and budget, and you're managing the hard cost and soft cost contingencies in your budget. The last phase is lease up and closeout. And I just want to, there's so much that's important in this phase, which I know Kimberly and Julie are going to be talking about too later. But I really want to emphasize that this work starts 3 months, at least 3 months, depending upon the size of the project, before your construction is complete. You've reached the time. This is a super exciting time. You're actually going to get to house the people that we want to serve. But in order to do that successfully, the entire team has to be working in unison and in sync, and it's just so important. And the reason that it's imperative is because you want to pay off your construction loan, and lease up must go according to the schedule set out so that you can pay your construction loan back. And you really need to have your entire team, including asset management and property management, working together. Next slide. So before I hand it off to Kimberly Taylor, I just want to end by naming a few risks that I wish I would have understood early on in my development career. And I'm going to name these by those phases of development. So overall, mistakes will be made. You'll never stop learning in this work. It is incredibly complex. And that's just part of the risk, is that mistakes are made. Feasibility. It can take years to get a financing award. And so it takes a level of perseverance. It may take several times applying to the state financing agency to get an allocation of tax credits. Pre-development. How much it costs to be a developer. I wish I would have understood that a little bit more. It takes staff time, consultant fees, land holding costs. And these are all costs that would be reimbursed to you or paid back to your pre-development lender, but you're not able to pay yourself back or your pre-development lender until construction starts. And so that could be 3 years, it could be 4 years. And so again, it's time and money in pre-development. Construction. I think market risks are real during the construction phase. And I call this out today because we are experiencing an unprecedented time with interest rates rising, and construction loans are typically at a variable rate. And so what we thought at the start of a project that we would pay to the construction lender in interest is well beyond what we had budgeted for. And I can say this is probably the first time, this is where I keep learning. In the 25 years I've been doing this, where I have a better understanding of the real risks as it relates to market changes during the construction phase. And I think we've been seeing this also in the costs for materials. So it's very real, and it's really important to understand. And these risks during this phase right now, we are seeing developer fee at risk and organizations at risk as well, because you have to find a source to pay for construction loan interest. And right now we're seeing developer fees being decreased in order to manage that. So lastly, lease up and close out. What I wish I would have known earlier is the important role that asset and property management play, and how important it is to involve them during all phases of development, but in particular during lease up and close out. And we'll get into detail about that. And I think I'll just add one more is because I know there's some resident services people in the room and I don't want to forget about you. But involving your resident services staff is really important too. I remember working on a project and the resident services office was designed and the furniture selected and I thought it was perfect. And then my resident services director looked at what the development team did and said, this is all wrong. We can't serve people in this configuration. And so it's just an example. It's a risk about not involving the right people throughout at the right time in the process, and thinking that as the developer or the architect that you know how best to design the space, when really the people who serve the tenants are the ones who know best. All right, I'm going to turn it over to KT. Thank you so much.
You go first.
Oh, okay. Hello. My name is Kimberly Taylor. Some folks call me KT. I'm the director of asset management at Housing Development Center. I've been at HTC with a tiny break in there since 2010. And I've been in this industry almost 25 years, just like Andrea. 1999 is when I started. I get one slide in this presentation, so I'm going to milk it for all it's worth. But Tracy wanted to see if are we going to do it after my slide?
I was going to do it now.
I guess we wanted to just take a pause and make sure that folks didn't have any questions or and there's folks online, so we wanted to stop there too and see if there was anything. Just give you guys a platform. No? Okay. All right, awesome. We'll keep going. Okay, so I'm here to talk about the readiness to own. So asset management, which I'm very happy to say, is kind of having its day right now. We've been waiting a long time for this. So for the asset managers in the room, you're going to know what I'm talking about. I think that developing and owning housing is harder than maybe it's ever been. And what I want to spend just a couple minutes talking about is what does it mean to actually own the housing development. For all the developers in the room, including my colleagues here, development is like shiny and awesome and exciting and ribbon cutting and keys and residents and amazing building. And I agree, it is amazing. But when the development is done and everybody starts talking about the next new development, asset managers and property managers and resident services coordinators and all the folks on the ground are now in charge of managing this asset. And that impacts your organization's ability to be able to do future development. And so if you have an existing portfolio of housing, you need to make sure that that existing portfolio is doing well. That means making sure that you're in good standing with all of the regulators in the industry, the funders, your lenders, your tax credit investors. All of those folks are going to be looking at your existing housing portfolio to make sure that it's doing well so that they know that they can trust you to do a new development. And that is really, really hard right now. Properties are really, really struggling for a lot of reasons. And we're going to be talking about that in the last session today when I talk about lease up, tax credit lease up with development, asset management, and property management integration. So that's going to be a super hot session. So you should come to that. Okay. Accounting systems and processes monitored regularly by the board, and the board has a clear understanding of asset management. So in the last 3 years, I've done 6 different board trainings on what does it mean to own affordable housing? What is asset management? It's fairly 101, but like it's incredibly important. I've worked with a lot of boards, and obviously there are a lot of organizations out here that do other things other than housing. So sometimes your board members their expertise is in things other than housing. So as Andrea was talking about, it's really important for your board to understand, what does it mean to own housing? What is our role in this? Which again, Andrea talked about, but there's a board training series that we can do to help your board understand what it means to own affordable housing. So that board members can provide the guidance that folks are looking for. Again, organization and existing properties produce regular, timely financial reports. That seems pretty obvious, and it seems like you could easily do that. Not so. You are relying on property management, whether it's your in-house property management or third-party property management, to produce those reports for your properties. That is harder now. And there are, again, a lot of reasons for that, but we don't have a lot of property management options in affordable housing. So all of our property management companies are really strained. I could talk about that for the rest of the session, which I'm not going to do. So come talk to me after if you're interested in hearing more. Positive cash flow assures ongoing financial health outside of new development, i.e. not relying solely on developer fee. So back in the day, smaller organizations were doing these developments to get these big developer fees, and that would sustain their organization for several years, getting minimal cash flow from the properties themselves. Getting cash flow from properties now is nearly impossible. Again, a lot of reasons for that, but the more layers of funding we have in a project, the more that money is kind of spoken for. So if your project does cash flow, that money that's left over is usually going somewhere else and not to you. That's a common misconception that folks are like, oh, well, we'll have cash flow, we can use that. It's already spoken for. So especially nowadays. So just keep that in mind. And then in-house or contracted management are available to execute and operate the project. Again, easier said than done. Property management and asset management, for that matter, have serious capacity issues right now. So they're available, but they're just really oversubscribed. So anyway, sorry, I'm kind of being negative, but just bringing the realism here. Okay, I'm gonna hand it back over to Travis.
We'll talk later about how to mitigate all this risk, I promise.
So as Katie pointed out, the development side is totally rainbows and unicorns. It's all awesome. It's lovely. And we get the shiny events. Not exactly, but we do get the shiny events. So anyhow, you're ready to develop. You've prepared your organization. You're aware of the risks. You're ready to go for it. What is it? How do we even decide what we're going to develop, who we're going to serve, what's going on? And so just a few of the considerations to think through here is, not all of this is set in stone at the get-go, but this is really, really important to think through. What are the must-haves that your development needs to do or needs to serve or needs to be? What are the nice to haves? These are things that'd be, great to build in. If we could serve these folks, it'd be awesome, but we don't have to, but we definitely have to do this piece. And what are the things that, you can let go of if you need to, versus the things that if we can't do this is our no-go decision on the project. It is dead in the water if we can't do this. And so it's important to think through your organization or the population that you're serving, the sort of mission, the vision, the values there. Are there particular incomes that you're trying to serve? If we don't serve folks who are experiencing chronic homelessness, we're not going to do this deal. Or maybe it's if we don't serve low-income working families, we're not going to do this deal. The reality is there's, we talked about, or I talked about anyhow, the whole housing continuum, and there are way more needs than there are resources to develop and sustain this work. And so it's important to really think through critically, where are those decisions? What will we do or what will we not do? It's income, it's unit size and type. Are you developing family units and you need to have all 3 bedrooms? Or are you serving seniors or singles who need, who don't need a 3-bedroom apartment, who maybe can make do with a studio apartment? To talk to your property managers, talk to your asset managers. If you've got a portfolio with a lot of studio apartments and those are always turning over and you can't rent them out, don't develop more of those. It's those sorts of things. It's also thinking through community need. What are the consolidated plans or the comprehensive plans for your community? Can you even, if you're developing in a particular area, does it meet those community plans that your planning department and your city council and your other community members have come up with to say, this is what our need is, this is what we should develop? It's state housing needs assessments. I'll give a shout out to Julia Metz and Michael Anderson with Sightline, who have a sign up out on our table out there. The state of Oregon is going through some new processes for housing needs assessments and what that means for communities. And so it's thinking about how you align to those needs, either meeting them or sort of diverging from them. It's looking at a market study to make sure that there's actually the demand for who you think you want to serve or who your organization serves. Are there the people who want to rent the units that you have or can afford to rent those units? And then location is really, it's alignment with all of those things that we just talked about, but it's also proximity to your organization's other properties. If all of your properties are in the Portland metro area and you're like, I want to do this new project in Coos Bay, that's going to be a lift, right? And so making sure it's there, making sure the services that you're not providing, but that your residents need are near the development that you're considering, that the amenities that you provide or that are around your development are there. And that management is actually available to, and maybe you're sharing management, or if you have a property manager that leaves and you need some coverage, is there another property anywhere nearby that they can support that? So it's thinking through those sorts of things. And so next slide. I'm going to go really quickly down into the weeds here. And talk about QCTs and DDAs. We in affordable housing love acronyms. So these are qualified census tracts and difficult to develop areas. In short, federally recognized geographic areas where affordable housing is either most needed or least likely to be developed. The idea is both meeting the need and or providing housing where there's opportunity and where there isn't a lot of other affordable housing, hopefully decentralizing poverty. It's aligning, as my colleagues were talking about, with other funder and community priorities. These are the qualified allocation plans. It's the state's roadmap that they give to the federal, that they must provide for the federal government for tax credit investment purposes of how they'll meet federal priorities and local needs. Those local implementation plans, funding solicitation specific priorities, is the funding that's available right now focused on homelessness and small units? Is it focused on family units? What does that look like? That's gonna really depend how you can be responsive to that. Is your project fundable? You'll hear later tomorrow, Oregon Housing and Community Services, OHCS, is going through a re-envisioning of how they are putting out funding beginning next year. And so there's a changing landscape there. And what does that look like for your project? Questions yet to be answered. And then buildability, and really thinking about, can you actually build what you want to build, where you want to build, which Julie gets to talk about.
Hello, I'm Julie Priksh. Good luck ever seeing how you spell my name and pronouncing it correctly. I am with Travis, a director of real estate development, and I come from the architecture and construction side of the table. So My work is a lot more tangible. I am working closely with the architect and the contractor and the owner to take all of the information that is gathered from these other people to build the building. And so in this feasibility phase, to start out with, we're working to look at a site. So we've determined who we're going to serve. We've determined that we have the financial backing and the staff support. We have the experts collected that we're using their feedback. And we have found a site. We could talk for hours about how you look for the site. But let's say that we have the site, we have to start looking at the planning and zoning and all of the requirements that the city lays on it. We have to look at all of the requirements, environmental requirements. So what is existing in the site itself in terms of, was there an underground storage tank? Could there potentially be a wetland? Could there be vapor encroaching from a neighbor's property? And so all of those things have to be determined. And then we work really closely with our designers, our architects and engineers and planners to bring that vision of who you're going to house, how you're going to house them into a building, and determine how many units and what size can fit on the site, what community amenities will be included, and how that site will be developed. Next slide, please. I always like to caution my clients that a free site is not always free. And there are a lot of unknowns. You could be looking at a beautiful piece of property, but the city might have a property dedication to widen the street out in front. A previous use, like I said, may have disposed of hazardous materials. These are all real life examples that we're going through right now in-house. So hazardous materials may have been dumped on the site. There may be an underground storage tank that we believe is there historically, but we just can't find it. And they did eventually find it in construction. A grassy field might look clean and pristine, and there may be some plants on it that indicate that it's actually a wetland. And so it's always very important to bring in the experts, work as a team, look at the site, look at what can be developed to determine if that site is actually practicable for your uses. Oh, and then I'm going to pass this back to Travis.
Yeah, and just to keep us moving, I'm going to go through this really quickly, but all sorts of ways to acquire the property. Maybe somebody offers you that free but not so free site. Maybe you buy it and hold it. That gives you control of that site until you get that funding application funded. But you may be holding it, you may be paying holding costs, you may be paying interest on that acquisition loan, you may be paying property taxes, you may be mowing the lawn, all of that stuff until you actually develop it. So benefits, drawbacks, lots of different purchase options, whether you have a long diligence period with your seller might be ideal for you to research all of those things that Julie talked about. But that may mean paying a higher price because your seller doesn't want to be so patient, or they want to get compensated for being patient. Lots of different scenarios there. Thinking through your timing relative to funding applications, organizational funds, everything else, and making sure that you're aware what your options are for cancellation if you find out that it's a wetland or it's toxic or your funding doesn't get approved or anything else. And maybe you don't end up canceling it, but it's making sure that you're going in eyes wide open.
So next slide, please. Oh, we should have, yeah, that one. Yes, thank you. So that's been a lot of negative risks and cautions. And now we get to my personal favorite part of a project. What can we do? So we know all the environmental issues that might be on the site. We have an understanding of what the jurisdiction is going to require on the site. We have our team assembled, which actually I'm going to go into in the next slide. We have determined who it will be serving. So what is your program? What kind of units do you want to provide? And then what are the support spaces? What other spaces do you want to make sure we include? And at this point, I like to talk to people about having their wish list. So develop your wish list. There will be plenty of times, I'll talk about that in the next session, where we have to scale back on that wish list. And I always try to keep an idea, a hold on that wish list. But this is the time to really come up with those wishes. We've determined what's physically possible, working closely with our team of designers, engineers, and planners. And we've determined what's financially feasible. So working with our lenders, working with the staff person or development consultant to understand what kind of budget and what that pro forma looks like and what can we do financially. We start to put a vision to that dream. In hindsight, I think this slide should have been earlier, so I apologize. Next slide, or the slide you're going to see next. So that team that I was referencing, the owner, we've talked a lot about the things that the owner needs to be ready to provide and the roles, responsibilities, and risks. The architect is an integral part of that team, can be negotiated either through a qualifications process, typically for affordable housing. It's done through qualifications process. They ideally will be engaged from that very first feasibility testing all the way through the 1-year warranty walk. So it is important to understand that those people you will have relationships with for years to come, as well as the general contractor. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the general contractor in the next session. Selecting that general contractor early on to give pricing, feedback on how you're actually going to build on the site. And then if you determine your organization needs additional support, that development consultant. And then there are additional, so next slide.
So many partners. And as Julie sort of pointed out, one of the things that's a little tricky is this development process is not linear. There are lots of starts and stops. The order that you think you're going to go in always gets changed up. It's that if this work were easy, everybody'd be doing it situation, but also this work is not easy. And so there's a little bit of everybody involved. All those owner responsibilities again. There are attorneys who are involved in your land use processes where you need confirmation and legal advice there. There are attorneys involved with ensuring that you meet all your tax credit obligations and other making sure that that you understand and all of the legal documentation, that you understand the risks with the requirements that you're getting into. The accountant's projects get audited at least twice through the development to make sure that the costs that you're incurring meet the obligations and check the boxes that they need to for the funding that you're securing. And then so many other consultants that help to ensure that your project meets all the needs and requirements that it needs to. Next slide. And then a few more folks. Folks of fans of Parks and Rec will probably recognize the image on this slide and may think back to the pilot of that series. And sure, we just want a little park. We're just gonna develop a little park. Not that simple. Neither is affordable housing. The funders get in on things. They've got their own needs and requirements, the local jurisdictions. You've of course got the neighbors. Hopefully they're supportive and you've warmed them up before you've started doing the development so that you don't have them coming at you angry. So many other supporters, detractors, procurement rules, MWESB inclusion, that's minority, women, and emerging small business, or the state's COVID, and I don't even remember what that acronym stands for. But also represents the idea of our affordable projects really should and can support and lift up the communities that they are intended to serve, not just with the housing, but with the development and construction of them. HDC has a particular strategic focus on that that we work with our clients to achieve. Happy to talk much more about that. And next slide. Just a few final thoughts, and we hit on these a little bit at the beginning, but lots of risks and ways to mitigate them. In the past few years, supply chain, weather, smoke, fire, rain, snow, ice, pandemic issues, ability for workers to be on sites next to each other, market forces, whether that's supply chain, whether that's cost of supplies, whether that's availability of labor, interest rates, all of those things. There's ways to mitigate those. It's important to be aware of the risks, at least to the degree that you can be. Looking forward to getting back to precedented times. But there are ways that we help our clients and ways that you can think through and really try to go in eyes wide open to mitigate all of these. And then I'll just give one final shout out to the HDC Community Fund. That's our community development financial institution that Tracy mentioned at the beginning of the session, provides pre-development and other assistance to help organizations do this work and mitigate some of those risks. And I think we've got about 5-10 minutes for questions and feedback before our break and we dive into the next session. And for those of you who will join our next session that starts at 10:30, this is the one that we'll talk about from funding to closing. So you've figured out your project, you know what you're going to develop, you've identified your funding, you've got your eyes wide open about those risks. You've now hopefully secured that funding. How do you get to construction? So that was what we'll talk about starting at about 10:30. Any final thoughts from us or what questions from all of you? I recognize a hand back there.
Hold on.
So yeah, I'll break the ice. Few of you know me. So you've talked about a bunch of the changing marketplaces, market issues that we've run into, supply chain, interest rates, all of that. I'm hoping this afternoon when Kimberly talks about lease up that we'll delve into how the qualified tenants scenario has been changing rapidly. And I realize a lot of that is due to COVID, but I don't think those issues of changing income, changing job status, working, not working, getting government subsidy is going to change. So how does a nonprofit mitigate those issues that suddenly what you thought was going to be a whole bunch of people that were going to qualify for these units have completely disappeared? I don't know if that results in loosening some of the regulations so that, yeah, we tried to serve 90%. We tried with most of our people to stay at 60% AMI, but gee, are we allowed to have a few in here that are more like 65 or 70? Can there be some flexibility in qualified tenants in this changing environment?
So statement, not a question. But that's statement and question. We will talk about it a little bit in session 3, and then we'll talk about it a lot in the last session in this room today. So the lease up and like integration with the team. So if you want to hear more about that, we'll talk about it. Question over here.
Yeah, and while KT's walking over, I would just answer this in another way,
Okay.
Maggie, that I know you're very familiar with, but to give additional credence to what KT mentioned at the beginning of the session, it is beginning that, and what Andrea mentioned as well, it's beginning that lease up early. It's connecting deeply with your property manager and your asset managers well in advance of when you're ready for folks to move in, so that you're aware of those issues before they become problematic for converting your construction loan into your permanent loan. It's working closely with your resident services staff so that they are communicating and supporting and assisting those folks who you want to lease to, and making sure that they're qualified, making sure that they have the documentation they need to demonstrate their qualifications. And making sure that your resident services staff understand what those qualifications are, so that they can really prepare and support your intended residents through that process.
Training.
Totally.
Good morning. My name is Luisa Padilla, housing coordinator, and so we provide services for permanent supporting housing. So our clients, our families, they're 30%, and so they're project-based and tenant-based. For us, it's super important when developers are developing housing or apartments that they do research of the population that they're serving. Because if you're putting families in units and there's no parking or there's no playing structure, so they're getting tickets, families are getting notices because kids are running and they're not like, so now they're at risk to be homeless again. So just think about the area, also the location, if there's bus transportation, the schools, stores, all that. But it's super important just to look at the population that you're serving, because if you're just building apartments, and it's affecting the people that are living there.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
I'll just add some additional emphasis to that too. And those are those really, really important early conversations that your organization and your board and your residents and your supportive staff are having to talk about. What are those must-haves? What are those nice-to-haves? Will we, if we're developing this project and we can't put parking on it, is it dead? Or you know what, we can make it work because there's good transportation here and stores nearby. You know, what are those decisions? If we're developing a property and we don't have sufficient space to support those residents and to consult with those residents who need supportive assistance, we can't do this project. So we need to make sure to have that space in here, and it's working with your prospective residents and your supportive staff. I've made that exact mistake that Andrea was talking about in developing service space that I thought was perfect. It totally met everybody's needs, and we were getting ready to lease up the building, and it was like, this doesn't work. And you can pivot on those things, but it's having those really important and deep discussions with the people who are doing that work and with the people who are in the units that is so important.
And I think it's important to be very honest with yourselves about, oh yeah, well, we want to do this project, so it'll work, it'll be fine. Because when you work with the services folks and the asset managers and the property managers, like, no, it doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, then you have a project that isn't performing, which then impacts your ability to do future development. So everything trickles down or up. You know what I mean?
Sideways, trickle sideways.
Yeah, and I just thought I would share another example. So double loaded corridor hallways in the winter are the play structure for children. And so, choosing a carpet that's going to get stains on it, that's going to have a lot of wear and tear, is really important. So another lesson learned on my part.
Rooms on two sides of the hall. Thank you very much for joining us for the first session. We'll be back here at 10:30 to take us through construction.